Good evening, Sealaska shareholders. Thank you for joining us on our third podcast. Earlier this week, we hosted Monaco Ortiz. I'm Shay Mata, your host for today's live stream. I'm a Sealaska shareholder and I volunteer on our Facebook group's podcast committee. Today, our guest is Patrick Anderson, an independent candidate for the Sealaska Board of Directors. Candidates have opening and closing statements and will answer our questions on Sealaska's financial performances, the differentiation among the candidates, election reform, and whether the candidate thinks Sealaska is headed in the right direction. We also invite shareholders to post a question during the live stream in the comment section. This is important. If you want your Facebook profile picture and name shown in the questions, please go to streamyard.com/Facebook and click the big blue button. Okay. Hi, Patrick. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, good afternoon. My pleasure to be here.
All right, let's begin. Moving on to our first question. We'll allow time for an opening statement. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are running for the board in 2 minutes or less.
Absolutely, Shay. I have served on the board before. I have had and been involved in a lot of public service. I'm very fortunate to have gotten a great education, both my undergraduate degree and law degree, and I have been a practicing attorney in the past. I am a member of the Alaska Bar Association, but by choice, I choose not to practice law. Instead, I have spent a good part of my last 20 years in my career as the chief executive of a number of nonprofit and tribal organizations. So I've had a lot of business experience. I also taught at the University of Alaska Southeast. I'm running again because I'm not happy with what has happened since I left the board. We had adopted a strategic plan that I felt would take us on a pathway towards more prosperity. And instead, what I find is that we're not even doing as well as when I was on the board earlier. So I took this opportunity because I know shareholders are very interested in the corporation during the campaign. And I wanted to be able to continue to educate during the campaign period. I'm not sure about being elected because it's difficult as a candidate. I've run 4 times as an independent. And if I'm not elected, I still feel like I have accomplished my purpose if we are able to educate more shareholders on what we should be looking for in our corporation. Thank you, Shay.
Thank you, Pat. Moving on to the next question about financial performance. This graphic from the podcast Bleeding Red Ink summarizes Sealaska's financial performance for the last 23 years. What do these numbers mean to you, and what do you think explains them? And we can show the first graph.
Okay. I saw this graph first when it was presented by Brad Fletch, but I have similar numbers. I've been analyzing performance for the last 20 years, and I do it in a way that is similar. In 2017, I wrote about the corporation acknowledging that investments and 7i revenue were something they had little to no control over. I was actually the advocate of that while I was on the board. I insisted that we could not control the investment market or 7i revenue. What's happened since I left the board is that we had a lot more 7i. So back in the year 2004, when I first began analyzing, we had very little 7i, and Sealaska contributed most of it. For operations, it's pretty much the same thing, except that we had less capital to work with. And the businesses that we brought in some years were doing okay, but not as well as I thought they would. So what the numbers mean to me is that for the last 5 years, most of our revenue has come from 7i, from our investments, and from the carbon credit sales, which I view basically as a lease of corporate assets and not a real business operation. In 2021, there was a claimed profit of $60.9 million, And when I analyzed that, there was 70 plus million that came from those three sources: investments, 7i, and carbon credits. And what I've stated time and again is that from a value analysis, our business operations do not return enough generally to even pay our general and administrative expenses, and other expenses have kicked us to the point where I believe we are actually not returning value. Now, it gets even more complex than that because I do more analysis than just what is on here, but for purposes of this slide, that's how I interpret it. Our revenue has been coming from investments, carbon credits, and 7i. Those are available to whoever's on the board and to whoever runs the company.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Here's the next graph if you wanted to add anything else to that.
It just repeats pretty much everything that I just said. Operations income, we've had a few bad years. And so in 2012, 2013, that huge red line indicates the magnitude of a loss that we had from one of our subsidiaries. That's to be expected. That's why we end up having a diversity of businesses. They should offset depending on how you set it up structurally. Way back in 2000, that was another real horrendous year. Part of what we do in a really bad year, though, is to clean up the balance sheet, taking a lot of things off and writing them off at that point in time. So that's what happened in that year. Excuse me. And this year, or 2021, we had a decent year, but I projected before the numbers came out that since the stock market was doing very poorly, management said they wouldn't be selling carbon credits, that there was a significant potential that we would have a loss. But the red refers to what they talk about as their operations, and their operations include the foods and the service industries, and they also include the investment income in that. And the 7i revenue just happened to be overwhelming in 2022. And basically, if it had been down in the 18, 19 million range, as I thought it might have been, then we would have had a real loss in net income. But that didn't happen this year.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Moving on to the next question. What differentiates you from the other candidates? And could you tell us about your background in terms of education and experience to serve as a Sealaska board member?
Well, a lot of that education came through law practice. I already mentioned my undergraduate degree was from Princeton University. I had a law degree from the University of Michigan, both very good schools. When I passed the bar exam, there were only 4 of us who were Alaska Native and members of the bar. So I've been first in a whole bunch of things. But what I realize is that learning is lifelong. And what Princeton and Michigan taught me is that I need to continually be looking at the data and information that I need. And I've done that. With Sealaska, I was not familiar with the management of investment funds. I took training on it. I did a lot of independent learning. I looked at a lot of our management presentations. I talked to a lot of our individual consultants, and ended up getting a really great education in the investment market. That's how I know that we really have no influence with it. During law practice and prior to that, I became very familiar with the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. I understand that intimately. I've taught courses at the graduate level at the University of Alaska on the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. But most of all, I have paid attention to the financial reports. And it's a reason I've been trying to help educate shareholders about what happens. It's very intricate. It's very elaborate. So some of the things that I hinted about that are not real common, for example, I pay attention to inflation and how it impacts us. And so I just recently looked at a claim that Sealaska made, and what I discovered is that it's not a correct claim. What happened is that in 2021, they said they had record investment income. Investment income is contained on the income statement. And I look at that, it's a fact, it's a number. But they represented that 2021 was a record investment earnings. And I happen to know that in 2006, investment earnings were higher. It's contained on the same line item as investments. And these are the things that I remember and can call out. I had training in tax, same thing. I understand how Sealaska has utilized net operating losses and how they've utilized an 18% reduction in corporate income taxes to bring more money into the corporation, which I agree we should be doing. When we bring that money in, we don't pay as much in taxes on those as we did before 2018, and NOLs have given us the opportunity to essentially recapitalize. I think we need to utilize that. So I focus on business. In the past, I left others to focus on other matters, public policy, although I participated heavy in that. So I think those are the things that differentiate me, Shay.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. Before the next question, I just want to put out a reminder that if you come up with any additional questions during these questions that I'm asking, if you could drop them in the live chat and we will respond to those at the end of these questions. So moving on to the next question. Election reform. What does election reform mean to you, and what, if anything, do you want to do about election reform?
A couple of things that I want to mention. First, a lot of people don't believe in discretionary voting. I've explained since I first understood what discretionary voting could do, and that was back when Cluckwan was running an independent slate, to say that it's a tool that we can use, but we don't have the resources right now. I've analyzed independent votes over the past few years, and if those votes remain consistent, then we should be able to elect 2 independents every year. And that would take some work. It would take some money and an independent proxy with discretionary. One of the problems we have electing independents is that Sealaska puts only 4 candidates or 5 candidates up. When they do that, they limit the family and friends vote. Almost anyone who is known in the shareholder community has family and friends vote that will range from 150 to maybe 400 or 500 votes. There are only a few I know that are electable on their own without relying on discretionary votes. So when we have 8, 9, or 10 independents running, the family and friends vote will come out between 150 to 250, 300, and we won't elect anyone. So what I've been trying to educate shareholders about, and what I'm willing to try to help set up, is that if we begin to restructure so that there is an independent proxy with limited candidates, then the chances of getting people in there who are capable, competent, and qualified in business is much higher. That's the second part. I believe we need to have people who can converse at a fairly high level of business. And I didn't find that to be true when I was on the board beforehand. So if I'm mentioning certain things right now that seem complex, it is because it takes a while to learn those. So currently, one of the things that the corporation is saying is that EBITDA is how they measure their performance in terms of the operating businesses. But I listened to Brad talking about his 3-legged stool, and I asked him afterwards, I said, what are your thoughts on their EBITDA analysis? And it was the same as mine. We don't get enough information to calculate EBITDA, and we don't know how the decisions are made, but at least I know about EBITDA and how to calculate it and what it means. Most shareholders are not expected to, but Sealaska throws it out there and explains that this is a good measure. I don't think it's a good measure for us, and I've told them that. And so with election reform, I would like to see independent shareholders utilize the discretionary votes. The second thing is that as far as term limits go, yeah, it's probably good to take a couple of years off as long as you're not totally going to be coming back to the board. So that time, it should be utilized to gain different kinds of perspectives. So those are the 2 things that I believe are important. That we learn how to use discretionary, and that the term limits are just fine. I don't expect to spend a whole lot more of my life on this board if I am fortunate enough to get elected.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat. Next question. What are your views about the direction that Sealaska is heading?
I participated in it. I am extremely happy that our investment markets, for the most part, have done well in the past 7 years. I'm pleased to see that carbon credits were available. I believe it's important, though, to acknowledge that, as I said before, this current management, this current board, really has very little to do with the investment returns. Um, they have a managed portfolio, but I don't know that that really adds a lot of value. When we were looking at how to structure compensation, we used a very limited range of portfolio improvement. It's not real significant. When I look at the operating businesses, I had proposals while I was on the board on how to actually improve operations, and two board members and the COO both asked me if we could do it later. Well, thing about business is, uh, there was a book a long time ago by a very wise professor at MIT called Chasing the Rabbit. Almost every business chases the companies that are doing well, and when they learn something, they try to implement it. The point of this book was that you don't want to chase the rabbit. You want to be innovating, you want to be improving constantly. Every day, you want to try and get better and better and better. I can't tell you if Sealaska's gotten better, except that I don't believe our profitability is where we expected it to be or where management expected it to be when we adopted the last strategic plan. I don't think the foods bet has played out correctly. And as far as services, I know we have about 13 or 14 service businesses, but I can't tell you if any one of them are doing well independently. Collectively, they did about 10% on revenue last year. And I don't think that is really where we should be. We need to be earning more than that because you can actually get 10, 11% in the stock market. You don't need to be in operating businesses. You still have the volatility and the variability, but consistently over time. Uh, I just listened to a presentation, for example, about my alma mater, Princeton. Their endowment is earning about 11% annually. Now, that's a pretty darn good return. But if we dedicated efforts on that, then the stock market should actually be returning more for us. So those are the things that I don't believe they're talking about. I don't believe that they are making um, appropriate decisions about. And that's what I uh, would bring up time and again. I think we need to have great performance management, improvement daily, and we need to be in the right places at the right time. And diversification should be actually looked at and planned so that when we do have a bad year with one company, we don't have a bad year with all companies.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Moving on to our final question, or more rather, your closing statement. Is there anything else you want shareholders to know about you and why they should vote for you?
I haven't really spoken about the public policy issues that I have been engaged in or the cultural issues. I've had the opportunities, in large part because of my colleagues on the board, to participate in the cultural revitalization that we're experiencing today. I've worked with the Sealaska Heritage Institute quite a bit. Um, I worked on the language revitalization when we actually visited the Hawaiian language programs and started a strategic plan to get to a point where we were able to begin teaching our young people. I have served on a lot of different boards in criminal justice, for example, in law. I served on the Alaska Federation of Natives Human Resource Committee as its co-chairman. I'm currently going to be heading to the National Congress of American Indians in a week and a half to serve as their election and credentials chair, and then as a parliamentarian as we need it. I believe conversations are good and important. I became a parliamentarian for AFN and NCAI to help make sure that we have reasonable conversations, that they're on point, that they're discussing things that really matter. And what I've learned from it is that change is very difficult. It takes a long time to enact good policy. So we can't get impatient, but we need to have a plan and a strategy to move forward. Some of my colleagues, for example, Jackie Johnson Peta, I learned a lot from her. She is just downright brilliant when it comes to policy and how to present it and creating the relationships. Dr. Rosita Whirl, same thing. A lot of the work we do is not up front. It's in back, talking to lots of people, writing lots of papers. But I think we need to be participating in that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick, for answering all those questions. We will now be taking questions from our viewers. And to our viewers, you can either ask questions from shareholders of Sealaska or Sealaska shareholders. So let's see what we have. Okay, first questions from Vicky Mata. Were you on the board when the chairman of the board started to receive a $250,000 annual salary? Do you support this level of pay for the chairman?
Absolutely not. I was not on the board. It shocked the heck out of me. That is a huge salary. While I was on the board, we did start to give the chair a little bit more income than the rest of the board because of the work they had to do. But with the support of the corporate secretary's office, and we had good corporate secretaries at the time, and with the support of staff at headquarters, that the chair was able to do all of the things that needed to be done. And in addition, put in a lot of extra time. There were a lot of board members who put in a lot of extra time above and beyond the compensation that they received. But the answer to all of that is no, and I don't support this level of pay for the chairman.
Thank you. Okay, next we have a question about compensation. Tell us what you will do about the management bonus. What can you do about this? Do you agree with the 250 plus payment of the COB? Do you think the COB's pay and should it be eliminated?
Okay, I think I answered the second one of that. I have always said, and I served on the compensation committee, that if we can get a management team that returns above market earnings for the company, I am happy to pay a management bonus. I don't believe it should be excessive, and I don't actually believe in management bonuses at all. But it's some people need to be or feel the need to be compensated that way. I would be happier if we had good performance measures and we decided on what appropriate compensation was afterwards. I think the bonuses have been excessive, and I see how other corporations that have had carbon credit sales, for example, have not gone with bonuses. The way I look at carbon credits, it was a sale on a yearly lease that was paid up front. So when I average it out, it's about 1.4 million a year for 168,000 acres of forest. And I don't believe, since we own the forest, that very large compensation management bonuses were deserved for that.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, next question is from Rudy Briscar. If another independent candidate is ahead of you, are you willing to ask your supporters to change their votes to back the other candidate?
Interesting question, Rudy. I believe we can actually elect two candidates if the numbers remain the same as they have for the past few years. So I think the big question is there someone capable of going and kind of guesstimating where management team is at and see what can be done to try and elect two candidates? If I'm number three out of the three candidates are there, absolutely, I would be willing to do that. But I think the goal is to try to get two candidates elected, as I've written on my posts on Facebook.
Thank you, Pat. I think this is more of a comment than a question, but they say now that they qualify as a tribe. Can you check into that?
They do not qualify as a tribe, but statute gives Sealaska some of the attributes of a tribe that I tend to agree with, but not totally. So, for example, one of the attributes of a tribe is that under Public Law 93-638, tribes can prefer their tribal members and family of tribal members for employment. It doesn't mean they can't be incompetent and get jobs, but it means that if they have the qualifications for the job, they can be hired before a non-tribal member can be. So for Sealaska, that's a good thing. It means that we were able to hire shareholders and shareholder family members with a preference. Same thing for some of the other attributes. We would not be capable of being in the SBA 8A program without the consideration of our membership being tribal members, but also being pretty equal in the number of shares that they have originally. 100 shares. We were basically one person, one vote by then. So I thought it was carried a little bit farther when COVID benefits were made available. Corporations already had some COVID benefits, but when it was expanded, I was not real crazy about that. But even more so, I sat in on the debate at NCAI over that, and it got downright nasty over that debate. So, I think we need to be a little bit more civil about it. Some tribal benefits are great for the corporations, but they are not tribes. They're not going to be trying. Well, let me just add another benefit. We could compact as a corporation to provide certain government services, which is what tribes are working on doing right now. So there's some good, some bad, but they do not qualify as a tribe. They're not on the tribes list, and that would be what is required for them to be able to start to tap into the tribal monies that are available.
Okay, thank you so much, Pat. We have a question from Brad Fletch that we can't pull up, but I have it here. The sale of carbon credits took 125,000 acres out of the village's economies. What should Sealaska do to support village economies, knowing that carbon sales took so many jobs away? And if you need me to repeat any of that, I can for you.
No, not at all. Brad, good question, good observation. I think it was 2018 or 19 that CEO Malott gave a presentation to the Resource Development Council. And what he said is that our timber business provided between 400 and 600 jobs. And since most of our timber being harvested was on Prince of Wales Island, that's where a majority of the jobs were at. And it provided about 14 million in payroll. It's impossible to replace 14 million in payroll in the short term. And I did read that they were trying to create little jobs by subsidizing them, but that's not going to make a big difference. We had a plan and a strategy going forward to begin utilizing young growth timber. And there was a bridge period of about when I was looking at it, 15 to 20 years before there would be enough young growth timber. That's timber that's already been harvested. It doesn't have as much value as the old growth timber, but it is an economy that could have been sustained. I don't know what we would do to replace that. I never intended or thought when I was on the board that they would stop harvesting the timber. I know it's politically difficult, but young growth timber is a little bit different than old growth. In that, in Washington State, for example, it's a commodity. People do need wood. It's a little bit more expensive to harvest up here in Alaska, so we would have to overcome a lot of problems. But part of what we could do is to bring the corporate headquarters back home. They're now down in Seattle. to invest in a few businesses locally as opposed to putting our businesses in Europe and Iceland and other places that our shareholders have no access to. It was just surprising to see that happen and that much income and those many jobs removed from Southeast Alaska.
Thank you, Pat. We have a question here from Ray Austin. Why should shareholders trust you? When you were on the board previously, you never commented. Now you're talking. Will you quieten up if you get on the board?
I talked all the time when I was on the board. I was one of the when we did have community meetings, and when I started, we actually had community meetings twice a year in between 15 and 16 different communities down south and in Southeast Alaska. I was oftentimes a spokesperson, commenting on a lot of things. The big difference is that we do have shareholder forums that have been around for the last 6 or 7 years. And part of being on the board is that if you are, as I was, selected as a part of the candidates that the board endorses, they can very easily get rid of you, which is what happened. It's because I was commenting in the boardroom. I wanted to see changes. I didn't agree with Joe Nelson and his group, and I ended up not getting back on the board. I've never been quiet. I continue to speak. But I do know that that Sealaska has tried to weaponize banking and securities. I'm trying to reverse that. I'd like to see us somehow or another be required at Sealaska to make the same kinds of business analyses that the Securities and Exchange Commission requires. They require honesty, and you have to go in and say what's actually happening. I look at an annual report now and it looks like we're saving the world. I look at the financial statements, it's completely different. We're barely making any money outside of those passive sources and the carbon credits that we've gotten over the past few years.
Okay, and that is all the questions that we had for this evening from our viewers. So we'll be wrapping up here. And I just want to extend to the audience to remember that you can vote as many times as you want, and it's the last vote that counts. Changing your vote does not affect your eligibility for the early bird prize. You can recast online at mysealaska.com, and we're advocating here for change, so please vote directed and vote independent. Thank you again, Patrick, for taking the time. And viewers, Gunesh Chish for joining us this evening, and have a good night.